Welcome at the TU Delft Library at this lecture, Feeding Factory Farms, the History of the Nitrogen Crisis. The first installment this year of the History of Science lecture series. And that lecture series is organized by Studium Generale of TU Delft and by the TU Delft Library. And in this lecture series, we ask a historian from outside of the TU Delft to reflect on a current issue, in this case, the nitrogen crisis. And we ask a TU Delft researcher to reflect from the current debate on this historical case. So that's what we're going to do today. My name is Abel Streefland. I will be your host. I work here at the TU Delft Library as a university historian. I'm one of the few historians here at TU Delft. So what we're going to do today, I will give the floor to Floor Haalboom in a second. She will give a lecture of approximately half an hour. Then we will have a response by Henk Jonkers from the Department of Civil Engineering here in Delft. Then we will open the floor to questions, so please save them up for the end. And then we will have some more drinks at the end. In total, it will take approximately an hour, so then you know what you have signed up for. So, let's start, right? Floor Haalboom is assistant professor in medical and environmental history at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. Her research mainly focuses on the modern history of environmental and health problems associated with modern livestock farming, veterinary medicine, One Health, and concepts of health and disease. She is currently working on a NWO-funded VENI project called What Does Your Meat Eat? The global impact of Dutch livestock feed from 1954 up to the present. And I think we will hear something about that today. So give a warm applause to Floor.
Thanks a lot. First, I have a soft voice. I know that. So if anyone on the back row cannot hear me, please let me know. And I'm recorded for for those on the computer, so that won't be a problem. Yes, I will be talking about the history of the nitrogen crisis. As a historian, I quickly changed that, as you can see, into a history of the nitrogen crisis. And I'm going to try to convince you of my argument that this history of the nitrogen crisis really is a history of what we are feeding our farm animals here in the Netherlands. And to explain that to you, why that is the case, this is a picture of people and animals living in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is indeed a very densely populated country, not only by people but also by animals, as you may know. As an example, the province of Brabant, and you can see in the circle depicted that that people in orange are actually quite a minority in this province. Mainly poultry and also pigs there are many more pigs and chickens in Brabant than people. And this, of course, has consequences. And one of the major consequences that we notice and are debating today is the consequence of a big manure problem, manure pollution. Here you see that depicted as a graph or a map of Europe, and you can see that the Netherlands actually is producing the most manure in Europe as a consequence of these many animals. And this has created the problem that we are debating today in Dutch politics and in society at large, the nitrogen crisis. And this is caused, this crisis, by the problem that the courts have told the government this cannot go on any longer because of problems with nature parks. And the Netherlands has to do something about this. This has created the nitrogen crisis since 2019. And of course, this is creating a lot of societal upheaval. Like last summer, the blockades of roads by angry farmers who are protesting the plans to impose policy on reducing this manure pollution. The nitrogen crisis on the up right, you see a picture from 2019, angry farmers in front of the provincial government of Groningen, but also other problems associated with factory farming, as critics started to call it in the 1960s, are depicted here. So also, of course, the burning for soy plantations in South America, and the circumstances in which animals have to live in these factory farms. Animal feed, the feed that goes into those animals, those farms, is connecting all these different problems. So one of my arguments here will also be the nitrogen crisis is not, of course, the only problem associated with how we are keeping animals. I depict a map here that shows the present-day proportion of land area devoted to, in green, direct human food production, or in purple, animal feed and fuel production. In short, a large amount of available agricultural land is used to produce feed for animals, in purple, rather than food for people, in green. And the numbers here are big. So for example, 30% of all worldwide cropland in use today, that proportion of the agricultural land, of that, more than a third is devoted to animal feed production. Then the other 70% of available agricultural land is grassland. And of course, grass is also a direct feed for cows, for example, for animals. Of this grassland, more or less 1/3 could be cropland, could be turned into cropland if we wanted that. A lot of land is devoted to animal feed. And the Netherlands on this map seems to be doing quite well. It's quite greenish in a very purple Europe. The Netherlands is producing a lot of food for people, direct food for people. But of course, the way the Netherlands is producing a lot of food for people is in animals. So we are producing a lot of meat, we are producing a lot of milk, we are producing a lot of eggs. That makes the Netherlands green on this map. And this is of course also a little bit an illusion. Because to be able to do this in such a tiny country, to keep so many animals, we need land elsewhere and also oceans elsewhere to produce feed that goes into these farms. These are the shadow places of Dutch farms. So we don't know a lot about these places. Maybe we know the most about the burning of the Amazon forest, also Cerrado savanna in South America from the news. But we don't know a lot about the places where this feed is coming from. So I like this concept. It was developed by an ecofeminist philosopher, Val Plumwood from Australia. And she uses this concept to to think about how consumers in their daily lives and daily consuming actually don't know a lot about what is behind the products they're eating. This is already true for the meat, eggs, and milk, but it's even more true for the products that are behind that meat, dairy, and milk feed. So that's what we are going to delve into today. And I depict this book for those of you who can read Dutch. I highly recommend it. It's written by a professor of Wageningen University who knows everything about the feed issue today and is working on how we can actually make this more sustainable. Imke de Boer. And the numbers I just gave you about the use of agricultural land are also discussed in this book. This is what I want to do. How did we end up here is the first part of what I want to tell you. And then the second part I will devote to how are we going to change the future. As a historian working on the past, I'm very concerned about the future. And I actually think that the past is useful for rethinking what we can do, also because it's important what kind of ideas we have about the past, where we are coming from. How did we end up here? To start with that. Here you see a picture of a factory farm with cages for laying hens, a kind of farm that became popular in the Netherlands in the 1960s. This farm was called landless, niet grondgebonden in Dutch. To farm without land was only possible thanks to a new 20th century technological innovation, a modern kind of feed. You wouldn't maybe at this university don't think of this as a technology, but it was actually a lot of, I will show you. It was called compound feed, still is, mengvoeder. And as the name suggests, it was an industrial mix of different ingredients imported from all over the world. And the exact composition was determined by feed scientists. So a lot of science went into this feed. And in this way, diets designed for optimal production could be created for different animal species, pigs, chickens, dairy cows, and also for different age groups of these species. So when the well-known schijf van 5 was introduced by the predecessor of the Dutch Nutrition Center, het Nederlands Voedingscentrum, in 1953, was shortly after the Second World War, something similar had happened for pigs via this compound feed. Let's zoom in on these worlds on the left behind the compound feed to understand it better. The factories, the scientists, and the shadow places behind the feed ingredients across the globe. First, the factories. Two groups of factories produced compound feed. On the left, you see an example of a private feed company, the Unilever Calvé Delft compound feed company, Delvia. In colonial racist terms and images, I've blurred the N-word here. You see the Unilever trade and use of peanuts from West African colonies in a recipe booklet for consumers in the mid-1930s. An important reason why Unilever, as a producer of margarine and oil, food oil, was interested in feed production was that the production of food oil also resulted in a rest product suitable for feeding animals. The so-called oilseed cakes could be any oilseed, soy, sunflower seeds, all kinds of oil seeds. And this was very suitable for feeding animals. And what we see after the Second World War is that these rest products really couldn't be called rest products anymore. they became more important in volume in the Netherlands than the oilseeds imported for human food. So this was occasion for Unilever to found its own compound feed company, and this was Delvia. The second group of companies were the cooperative feed companies on the right. They were created by organized farmers or their agricultural organizations, like this one, the large company CHV in Brabant, CHV. Importing feed for farmers was not something entirely new. Already in the late 19th century, farmers started to do this in importing cheap North American grains to feed directly to their animals, bags of grains directly to their animals. But in the 20th century, this shifted to this idea of mixing those ingredients in the best possible way. And the idea was that in a cooperative way, the quality could be controlled for the farmers and also the price. Two very important issues for the farmers, because feed was very expensive, still is today. The largest amount of the production costs for a livestock farmer is feed. During the early 20th century, the number of such feed cooperatives grew tremendously, and feed commodities became the bulk of agricultural imports. As the Association of Private Compound Feed Companies, like Unilever Delvia, put it in 1954, an entirely new field of science, the science of feeding livestock, was another crucial factor in the rise of compound feed. These feed scientists were everywhere. Feed experts were affiliated to government agencies, but also to different kinds of industries, like the food industry, feed industry, pharmaceutical industry, agricultural and livestock industries. They worked on the feed's best composition for different animal species and age groups, like I just showed. And two examples of those feed experts are depicted here. Jan Grashuis, he was a veterinarian, but also a specialist on pig feed, and became the compound feed expert as director of the Institute for Modern Livestock Feed in the late 1930s. So compound feed became modern feed here, and he was a very important figure in turning it into that modern feed. And we see Dols, an agronomist who worked at the private food, oil and animal feed company. That is, he started his career there as a specialist on animal feed, and also became a very influential government advisor later. And the context in which these kinds of experts became very influential for policy also was the context of economic crisis and also the Second World War. What they did, they were asked to participate in the creation of the food distribution system that was set up to be able to deal with the circumstances of war. No imports possible anymore, basically, like we are, by the way, experiencing today, of course, as well. And this extensive distribution system had a very important feed component to it. In a period when the import of all those commodities became more difficult or even impossible, the practice of feeding grains, potatoes, and oilseeds to animals was explicitly reconsidered. All these edible commodities had to be used to feed humans rather than animals. And farmers needed to plow their pastures and to shift from livestock production to agriculture, as you see on the right. Bad news for the compound feed industry, you would say. But compound feed actually became more dominant during those years. The feed experts involved in creating this system made sure that the only animal feed allowed was compound feed. So the distribution system could very precisely decide this can go in there and this cannot. When farmers wanted to buy feed for their animals, they had to buy compound feed. And this system was in place for almost 15 years until 1953. And of course, the shadow places of the new Dutch landless farms. What went into the compound feed and where did it all come from? I focused on the period after the war here, of course. You see the main ingredients depicted here: maize in yellow, soy in green, fish meal in blue, and cassava meal in red. As you can see, maize is a dominant ingredient for most of the time, but you also see cassava meal takes over this role from the 1970s onwards. And of course, soy becomes very prominent as well, green. Let's zoom in on the year 1970 to see where this is all coming from. In the light colors you see depicted the proportion of the ingredients coming from the global south, and in the darker colors from the global north. In the case of grain imports, because I don't have the exact numbers for the maize itself, you see that the majority of this is coming from the global north, predominantly from North America, like was already happening in the late 19th century. Soy. In this period, the majority of the soy also came from the global north, but this was quickly to change. The United States, most of the soy came from the United States, but quickly after this 1970, it came from South America, Brazil, the most important exporter. Fish meal, 1970, almost all ground up fish to feed to animals came from Peru and Chile, global south countries. And then tapioca, this was only a global south commodity. Most of it came, especially also in the later decades, from Thailand. The result of all this was a steep rise in compound feed production during the second half of the 20th century. Mind you, this is not that long ago. In a very short period of time, this shift in keeping animals occurred. Factory farms became the standard, and compound feed was behind that. And of course, in the 1960s, critics started to call these kinds of farms factory farms. The manure problem was, of course, part of this shift all the time. Although the nitrogen crisis only started in 2019. This is, of course, not the case. Nitrogen pollution was there all the time. Okay, this was where are we coming from? Thank you. Now to how to change the future. And I think it's useful to look into the past for that as well. And this is why. The question whether or not factory farms are inevitable, we need them, or we don't need them, is of course a highly controversial discussion, a very polarized discussion very often as well. So on the right you see the arguments used by, I would say, agricultural modernists who say we need this kind of efficient, rational, realistic production, and the Netherlands is very good in that. And why do we need this? Because we need to produce as much food as possible. On the left, people say we need different ways of doing agriculture, for example, more plant-based, more ecological, more organic, more sustainable, all these kinds of words. And this debate, you see it occurring you can recognize these two positions in the debate very often. But the polarization, I want to argue, is not necessarily part of the history of the factory farms. And I will want to show that to you with one figure. Were factory farms inevitable? Of course, one of the assumptions behind this kind of debate is that in the 1950s and 60s, people didn't know better and they were creating this system for good reasons. They wanted to prevent hunger and they wanted to produce cheap food. This is all true, but it's not the whole story. And I want to show that to you with this figure again. Jan Grashuis, remember, one of the architects of compound feeding, one of the architects in that sense of factory farms. But he was also a critic, a fierce critic of some of the directions he saw happening in, or some of the changes he saw happening in agriculture. He didn't agree with that at all. And his arguments are maybe from our point in time sometimes surprising. But I think they are very interesting for overcoming the polarized debate about agriculture today. Grashuis didn't believe that factory farms were the only farms we needed. He actually had a view of a variety of kinds of farms. One out of 6, for example, in the textbooks on feeding pigs. He wrote a lot of editions about this. It was a very popular, successful book, Doelmatige varkensvoeding. And he only listed industrial farms, as he called them, as 1 out of 6. Other categories were, for example, using household waste to feed your pigs, letting pigs feed themselves on a rubbish pile near a city, using hotel waste, using your own produce as a farmer, etc. A lot of different options. So here's also a picture of a sow with piglets in a pasture in the 1960s. He also had very interesting ideas about the importance of biodiversity, we would say today. He didn't use that word. For example, he argues here against or not, he says there are limitations of what he calls an artificial pasture. A pasture with artificial fertilizer, with one kind of grass in it. He says, in practice, the cow turns out to be an expert chemist. In variation-limited artificial pastures, even the electrical fence is run over. The cows look for themselves what they cannot find in the artificial pasture. So compound feed is very important, but Grashuis argued, we don't know everything. So there must be things that are not in there that these animals need. And they're going to find it if we don't give it, and they will run over the fences. He was also concerned about the use of chemicals in agriculture. For example, DDT, a chemical Rachel Carson, the American biologist, would write a book about some years later. DDT seeps through the skin of fruits, therefore I will never fail to peel bought fruits. There is a strong possibility that man and animal will eat these chemicals. And he was very fiercely opposed to the increasingly popular practice to put antibiotics into compound feed because it boosted productivity. He said it's irresponsible to do this. We should not do this. And he lost, but he argued this very fiercely, and he actually delayed the introduction of medicated feed in the Netherlands with several years. All these concerns for Grashuis he saw this under one heading, so to say, and that was this one. He was very concerned over the growing power of the industry as he called it, over farmers. And with the industry, he meant chemical industries, pharmaceutical companies, Unilever companies, all these kinds of big companies that he thought got too much influence. Very interesting if we are comparing that to today's discussions like this journalist Mac van Dinter wrote in the Dutch newspaper, the Volkskrant, about the agricultural industry behind the farmers and also behind the nitrogen crisis in ways. But he also asks, is this to the advantage of the farmer? Is the farmer actually benefited by what these companies want? Okay, so the history of the nitrogen crisis is a history of what Dutch farm animals are being fed. And what they are being fed is imported feed ingredients. We import the nitrogen, and that's why we are left with this problem. And that feed is not only connected to the nitrogen crisis, but to many issues of global significance. So destruction of ecosystems here in the Netherlands, but of course also where these ingredients are produced. Risk of disease spread. I showed the example of the antibiotics, but there are other examples. And global inequality in protein consumption. Who is eating animal proteins? For who are those animals produced? Relatively rich consumers, of course, in countries like the Netherlands. By the way, our meat consumption numbers, I'm quite surprised by that year after year, but they are not going down here in the Netherlands. We stay at the same high level of meat consumption, which is also a little bit surprising because, of course, vegan is very hip and popular, but it doesn't seem to change a lot until now. I also have to say here that it looks as if it's a better idea to drink cow milk than soy milk, because if you drink soy milk, the entire bottle will be soy, and here it's only a proportion. That's not true. Feeding soy to a cow costs much more soy than eating it directly yourself, because a cow has to live, and for living you will use energy and nutrients. Okay, I want to celebrate this new book. It's a great book. You can buy it in the bookstore, I think, next week. And actually, a large proportion of it's about global history of the Netherlands. A large proportion is about nature, animals, ecology. Also about the nitrogen crisis, and one chapter about the feed, actually the story I told you today. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Floor. As I said in the beginning, keep your questions for a little bit later. I will first give the floor to Henk Jonkers with an S. Jonkers from our Faculty of Civil Engineering, who will respond to the talk that we just heard of Floor. Henk is a professor of bio-adapted and sustainable building materials at this university. These are materials that contain or stimulate the growth of living organisms, resulting in increased functional performance and decreased environmental impact. Examples of this are, for example, bacteria-based self-healing concrete and moss-receptive concrete. A further research focus of him is on implementation of nature in the built environment, with the aim to increase the well-being of both humans, the quality of nature, and the climate resistance of built structures. So we have been asking quite a lot of people from TU Delft to respond to Floor's talk. And most of the people say, well, that's a topic that you need to be in Wageningen for that. We don't do that at TU Delft. And we are very happy that you, Henk, are willing to respond to this story. I will give you this microphone. I think that will fit, right?
Thank you, Abel. I need my presentation on the screen. Can you organize that? I was trying to handle an Apple computer, but I'm not used to that, so it doesn't work for me. Okay, audience, nice that you are there. I was very intrigued indeed by this topic. Floor, thank you very much for your presentation. Because indeed, I'm, as a biologist, working at civil engineering. And one of the topics, as Abel mentioned, is trying to implement nature in the built environment. And the reason why we would like to do that is that we are very certain that our well-being depends on the quality of nature and also the amount of nature that we have in our direct environment. For example, built environment. This is an image I just took from internet. I don't know if you get very emotional if you see this and if you think this is where I would like to live. For me, no. Because there's hardly any nature visible here. Maybe on the top left, on the bottom left, you can see 3 trees, but I think this is not very exciting place to live. To be very short, why is nature important to us? Because it provides us what we call a lot of services. This can be in form of food, can be in form of tangible products, but it's also in form of all kind of different processes that are very useful to us. So I just mentioned here 11 of those. I'm not going to treat them one by one, but you can see here in this image that you have different forms of nature. You have plants, you have animals, even bacteria and insects, who all are more or less able to provide one or more of these services to us. Now there's a debate maybe on what is nature and what is high quality nature. And so I give here 2 examples, 2 images. On the left hand, you can see a typical monoculture. And so this is what you typically find in agricultural regions. On the right hand side, this is somewhere in the tropics, you find a very biodiverse type of nature. Now biologists and environmentalists argue that on the right hand side you have high value nature. And on the left-hand side, you have low-value nature. Now, probably a farmer, I don't know if there are any in the audience here, will not agree, because you can ask yourself the question, but about economics. On the left-hand side, there's a very high yield of a certain product, but only one product. On the right-hand side, you will find that this nature, because of its high biodiversity, can provide a lot of these different services that nature provides at the same time. So this is what we see in the built environment if we do not have any nature around. And then we can see lack of recreation possibilities. People who live in these very dense urban cities, if they have some spare free time, they would maybe go for a picnic or hiking. Then they really have to leave the city to go elsewhere. Typically because they would like to do a picnic in nature. Heat stress, if you have a city without trees, then usually you find that the temperatures go up much, much higher as in the rural environment. A lot of pollution is happening, a lot of in the air, in the soil, in the water, but we also have risk of flooding. If we don't have nature and not a lot of vegetation, then there's no water retention. So in heavy rainfalls you can see that our sewer systems are usually not able to cope anymore with these amounts, the quantities of water, so you get flooding, and maybe you get also soil erosion if you don't have any vegetation being present. This looks much different. From a distance you can see a lot of green in comparison to the previous slide, and this is actually examples again of the services that nature can provide. It's not only about the environment, it's also about social aspects. You see on the top left, these 2 guys are farming, doing urban farming, so they produce their own food, but they clearly have fun. There's also social interaction. And this is sometimes also seeing what we lack in the built environment. Many, many more of those examples you can also see in this image. So the further question is, how much nature do we actually need for our well-being? Now this is an image. This I made myself, very close to here, actually opposite the street. This is the most, they advertise this as the most sustainable living quarter in Delft. Most sustainable. You know the reason, because these houses are energy neutral. But the question is, are people really happy here? Well, how is it with their well-being? So I did the study myself on the internet, and I looked for, let's say, high-quality studies published in high-level scientific papers, journals, and I found this study. What was also asking the same question, how much nature do we need for our well-being? And in this study, they found out that if you spend 120 minutes a week in nature, so being exposed to green vegetation, is good for your health and well-being. 120 minutes per week. In another study, also published in Science, extensive study, people made a summary, an overview, and they looked at how much nature do you actually need in terms of land cover for your well-being. And in this study, they said that it must be at least 30% of the land area must be covered by high-quality nature, and preferably 50%. Okay, knowing that, then you can still ask yourself the question, but what about economics? Now, this is a very difficult part of science, how to value nature in economic terms. But also these studies are being made, and there's also a summary here, where they try to add up, and then they found in this study that all the services that nature provides have an economic value on a yearly basis of 125 trillion of US dollars per year. And if you can compare that to the global national productivity, then that's only, our economy is only providing 94 trillion of dollars per year. So also in economic terms, you can already say that nature is more important than actually our direct economy. Another study was focusing on what is the state of nature. And so where do we find high quality, where do we find low quality of nature in the European Union? Well, interesting enough, they have researched this for all the countries in the EU, and they made this listing. And this is showing total area of land from 0 to 100% coverage, and how that specific land is being used, and whether it contains actually high or low quality nature. So in red, you see that the state of nature is very, very poor, is really bad, and in green, you can find high quality nature. So one question to the audience, which country is here on top? So which European country has the highest quality of nature? Who can guess? I guess you have not read the report. I put it here down here, State of Nature in the EU. It's a very big report, 300 pages. Haalboom. Norway? Finland? So Scandinavia? Idea? Yes? Everyone agrees? Well, of course, I pointed out here also the Netherlands. So we are very low in level. But it's Romania. Romania has the most high quality nature in terms of land cover. So then I thought, well, maybe this must be due to density of population. So then I checked on the internet, and in the Netherlands we have almost 500 people living per square kilometer. And in Romania it's only 87. But is this now the main reason? If we now also check for how is the land actually being used in the Netherlands and in Romania, we see an interesting phenomena. So in forestry is higher, is actually, in agriculture is actually exactly the same, 60%. Forestry is higher in Romania, 38%, And let's say residential areas is much higher in the Netherlands, logically because of the high population density. But intriguing, I find, is here that agriculture is both 60%. And so Floor, maybe you have an idea, but I guess myself, I did not really report myself completely, but I guess they have, let's say, low food, low nutrient intensive farming, what they do in Romania, in comparison to the Netherlands. So maybe they do more organic farming, and I don't know if that has to do with the state of the economy. And so maybe Romania is looking at the Netherlands, how to produce more and more food, how to increase, let's say, the economic production. So maybe this is an idea, interest for the agricultural industry, if they want to sell more nutritious food. Probably Romania is the place to go, but that would probably not be a good idea for the quality of nature. So conclusions here. In the Netherlands, we have only 10% of nature that is in a relatively good condition, and we have only 10% of our land is covered by forest. From studies, we have learned that you need at least 30% of land area and preferably 50% covered by high quality nature. So we need much more. So where can we get that? So maybe from shifting agricultural land to high quality and more higher quality nature, so as they did in Romania. Or maybe we can also look in the built environments. The one before last slide. So this is one issue, one aspect that we are studying at the civil engineering. We are developing different types of building materials, and one of them is concrete, which we call is bioreceptive, that allows spontaneous growth of certain plants, in this case mosses. So these mosses are already providing, as you can see on the right-hand side, at least 9 different surfaces which contribute to our well-being. And so we think this is maybe a possibility, a strategy to convert, let's say, built environments into also nature-rich, maybe high nature quality-rich environments. We're going to do a test this year still with Rijkswaterstaat. We are going to make these highway noise screens of bioreceptive concrete, in which we're going to quantify the performance in terms of noise absorption, of course the first function of these screens, but also absorption of pollution and retention of water. Because the interesting thing about mosses is that they take up their nutrients via the leaves and not via the roots, what other plants do. And so they literally grow on ammonia in the air, and they grow also on fine dust, which is in the air. So they like to grow on pollutants. And so therefore we think this might be something interesting. And how to make that? Bioreceptive concrete is actually making concrete which has a very porous surface layer, which can absorb and retain a lot of water, because these mosses are fond of water. And if you do that, then you can get spontaneous growth, not only of mosses, but as you can see here, also other plants. One example is the stinging nettle, brandnetel in Dutch. This is a sign of being in an area where there's a lot of deposition of ammonia, stinging nettle and blackberry, but also mosses. So my last slide is, I think we need to improve, also in the Netherlands, on our quality of nature, and at least one possibility would be to use also the built environment for that. And not only by moss receptive concrete, but maybe also by applying much more green vegetation on roofs and maybe also on facades. And so at least we would say 30 to 50% of the built surface then must be of high quality nature. So that was it for my part. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Henk. Is this your house, by the way?
No, this was in Germany. I found that, and I made a picture, and I asked colleagues at civil engineering, where do you prefer to live? If you have a choice in this apartment with a green facade, or would you prefer to live next door where there's no green facade? And much to my surprise, most of my colleagues actually opted for the non-green facade house, because they were worried about insects, worried about a lot of maintenance that they had to do.
Yeah.
came as a surprise to me, because I would love to live there, actually.
It looks like a great house, sure. Floor, would you like to respond to Henk? It's a possibility. We can also open the floor for questions to both of you, I would say.
I would say maybe first questions of the
First
audience.
questions.
We
Good.
have been
First
talking a
questions
lot.
from the audience. So, if there are any questions, please raise your hand. I will walk around with this fake microphone. You can take a seat over here. It's a fake microphone for the people at home. So, who would like to open the discussion? Always takes some time. True.
I was wondering if it makes sense to talk about a nitrogen crisis, if there's other concepts that would better explain what is going on, like ammonium crisis. Like that, I'm wondering if we are copying the concept of nitrogen crisis from the public debate, but perhaps as historians or scientists we should try to frame it differently. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I actually agree with that a lot. As you maybe saw, I put it in quotation marks in this graph of the compound feed with then the manure problem because of this, because it is treated like a crisis, like it's an acute problem that suddenly arose in 2019, but it's not a crisis in that sense. It's not something that all of a sudden appeared to be a problem. It was there all the time, and it was mostly ignored in many ways. And the other reason why I agree with you to be careful with this focus on this word is the focus on nitrogen. Because as I try to point out in my conclusion, but also with the example of what Gashuis was concerned about, there are many problems, of course, related to one another. And if we focus on nitrogen, and if we, for example, like you see happening a lot in how both the government and the agricultural sector, or the majority of the agricultural sector wants to solve this problem, is focusing on this particular problem. For example, by technological innovations focused on nitrogen, or focused on phosphate, or focused on whatever chemical is at that point the problem. And this is not really solving anything until now, at least. Maybe we'll find a technological solution tomorrow that it solves, but it's not very likely that we will find that, because there have been many attempts in the past decades to do that. So yeah, and there was also your point about technological innovation. The word itself is already interesting, right? It implies this is a solution. I think as an environmental historian and also as a historian of science, that we always need to think very carefully for what is it a solution and for who is this a solution. So for example, the wall you showed with the moss that is meant to absorb the pollutants, for who actually is this a solution? Is this maybe a solution for the people who want to drive cars and pollute and don't not be bothered with the consequences of that? Or is it really a solution towards a sustainable world? And I think this question, when you use this word technological innovation, is always important. Okay, long answer to your question.
Maybe if I can comment to that as well, Floor. Thank you also for the question. I completely agree with you, Floor, that we always have to think from let's say an integral problem perspective. So what I listed here is, for example, these 9 and maybe even 10 services that nature can deliver. And one of the crises is only the second one, clean air, where you can see that it's not only nitrogen in forms of nitrogen oxides and ammonia, but also fine dust. And so the others are also crises that could soon appear after this one. Temperature stress, CO2 related to climate warming, noise, water retention, water shortage, too much of everything, the lack of biodiversity. So it is a bit of a simple thing of, let's say, our politicians to only focus on one aspect and call it an immediate crisis and try to find, let's say, one group of industry which is mostly to blame. I think, yeah, but what is completely what you said is right. This is coming from history. So this is about the system, how our economy is actually organized, and yeah, you have to go much deeper than trying to only find one specific problem and finding a solution for one problem, because you need to address many more problems at the same time. Yeah. Is that more or less addressing your question? Or because there's also this technical aspect of nitrogen, because we have 80% of nitrogen in the air in form of nitrogen gas, which is not a problem, but it's the ammonia and the nitrogen oxides which are the problem. And ammonia is coming from the agricultural sector, and the nitrogen oxides from the combustion of diesel. So I think this is maybe also not clear to most people, but also the building sector is contributing to the nitrogen problem, but mostly because they use diesel in most of their processes, and diesel produces much more nitrogen oxides than other types of fuel. So there's also technical issues about defining something only as a very common nitrogen problem.
There was a question over there, so let me know if other people also want to ask stuff. Oh.
Thank you very much for your helder, clear introduction. You said an important thing, and that is that the global population is growing, and they're eating more and more meat and dairy products every year. So what we are trying to do now is fight the nitrogen, which is ammonia crisis, with reducing our cattle, whereas we want to eat more of it. So what we're doing is we are exporting the problem to countries where they produce the same meat and the same dairy products less productively and with more pollution. So if you look at the actual cause of our problems is the linear use of our minerals. Crop can only grow by the three basic minerals, which is nitrogen, phosphates, and potassium. And those three are the main elements for crops to grow. And what we do is we dig them up from mines in faraway countries. We bring them here, or we produce them with energy, gas or electricity, and convert it into nitrogen and bring it to our lands. We use it once, maybe twice, and then it's emitted into the air and causes all the problems we have, or it is ends up in our rivers and in the water, which causes other problems. Shouldn't we focus much more on the circular use of those minerals instead of the linear use which we currently have?
Yeah, thanks for this comment. Yeah, again, I would like to recommend the work of Imke de Boer. I showed her book, Past het dier nog op ons bord, but she also has given talks and wrote a lot of scientific articles, her and her team, on exactly this issue, because this is the big problem. And of course, also the importance is to look at it from a global perspective. You said that as a first comment, if we are going to do something about this in the Netherlands, we will only be exporting the problem to another place, right? So the reason, that's maybe good to say, the reason why I focus on the Netherlands is not because I'm so concerned about the Netherlands in itself. As a citizen I mean, I live here, but not as a historian so much. I use it as an example, basically. So, of course, if we would do the same thing in whatever country, and we are doing this, I just, on the train here towards Delft, I actually met an agronomist who had worked in Saudi Arabia on a dairy cattle farm and was feeding a lot of concentrates to the cattle there, milking them 4 times a day, which is a lot, actually, 2 times a day in the Netherlands. So this is happening everywhere. And it's happening for relatively rich consumers. And this is a global problem. We need to think about this from a global perspective. Is it just to be producing so much animal protein for a relatively small proportion of the population who can afford that? The plan, we probably cannot afford to be doing this for the coming time, as we have done it in the 20th century. And this is, of course, the same problem with climate change, etc. We need to be thinking about this from a global perspective.
Can I add to this? Because I find it very important question that you ask, because for 2 reasons. You said population is growing worldwide, and what if all these people are starting to consume the same amount of, let's say, meat as we do in the Netherlands? Now, intriguingly enough, if you look at this picture of this graph of population density, then you see that in Europe, we are in the Netherlands, the 2nd highest in population density, more than almost 500 people per square kilometer. At the same time, we are also the highest, let's say, agricultural producers of meat. And all this meat is exported. So there's a clear unbalance on the one hand side between the food that we produce in the Netherlands for our own population and the amount of food that we export. So concerning that, you would expect that there's worldwide still a lot of potential in each country to, let's say, not import Dutch meat, but import Dutch technology for making, let's say, meat or other agricultural products at a very efficient, effective rate. Because I think in the Netherlands we also are quite good in having a relatively low environmental footprint per kilogram of meat and other types of food produced. And this is so this. My point is, I think we should export technology and not the food products itself. And each country should be able, that's always a good idea, to sustain itself. And so there is still room, I would say, for other countries also to increase even their meat consumption in a sustainable way. But the way we have organized it now is out of balance. So some countries produce way too much, like the Netherlands, and others are producing too less, so they have to import all that. Well, investing in new technology, the question is if that is very efficient. In my point of view, it should be good to export farmers to other countries with their innovative technology, what they have at this moment. I also don't believe too much in innovations like capturing all this ammonia from these cow stables, because I know from experience that what you do in a laboratory is usually showing different results, and when you go outdoors, and shows you cannot simply extrapolate results from the lab to the real world environment. And this is a little bit of wishful thinking, what we try to do at the moment in the Netherlands. I try to stay in the current system. You are very correct by saying this is a linear system, because there's so much economy behind it, also in form of this agricultural industry. And so if we are going to change this system, it's maybe not the farmers, but it's the industry, the agricultural industry, who will immediately feel it in their wallets.
Thanks. Sorry, I wanted to see if there. Yes, I think this is the last question. I mean, we are already a little bit over time, but I would recommend you to keep this discussion going when we have some drinks and vegan, by the way, vegan snacks later. Last question.
Thank you. Thank you, Abel. Jos Wassink from Delta, the University Magazine. I want to see if you had the part of your talk, how to change the future, and then you gave some direction, but I didn't really hear an answer. So I
Yeah.
wondered if the answer would be simply stop using compound food or feed. Is that what you're implying?
I think that would be too simple, because I think, yeah, this is again about technological innovation. The word innovation implies that it's always better. This is not true. It depends how you use it and for what ends. And a technology is always used for ends. There are interests behind this technology. And this is what we should be thinking about. So what kind of interests are served at this moment? For example, in this technology of compound feed. And what kind of interest would we want it to serve in a just society? This is a political question. The answer to that question is, I think, not for me to give, especially not as a historian. Historians are very bad at giving policy advice. They always start saying, well, it's very complicated and it's, so that's also what I would say. But I think what I can contribute is that our way of thinking about the past is, okay, this had to happen. It was real. This was the only possible way it could go, because we are so good at this efficient agriculture. I'm actually very skeptical if we should be exporting this kind of technology to other places on the planet, because you are also creating problems with it. So I'm not so, but the technology in itself, the technology in itself might also be used, could be used, like Grashuis was arguing, you could use it in a lot of different ways. You can use it to only process stuff people can't eat. If you do that, you can not feed this many animals as we are doing today. You need a lot less animals, but you could do that. You could use the technology in such a way. So this is my point with that.
Thank you. Very small comment.
Very short comment, because I think again here we need to find a balance, because I fully agree with Dr. Grashuis that it's very bad idea to start even put medication in food. On the other hand, I can fully understand that if you have compound food and you make a very good balance of the different nutrients that the animals need. So now you're only talking about, let's say, food conversion efficiency. And so how many kilograms of food does an animal need to produce a kilogram of eggs or meat or whatever. But on the other hand, you also have to be very careful not to exclude other important aspects, right? Like animal well-being. Because on the one hand, you can say we are very low on CO2 profile per amount of food that we produce per hectare. But on the other hand, you have also other aspects that you need to take into the equation. And so if we compare, let's say, the food efficiency production in other countries, then we are far, far above. And I'm not saying that they are doing bad, and I'm not saying we are doing good, but I think there must be a clear balance between the two.
But again, this word efficiency implies it's good. We are doing better. But this word efficiency, what does it mean? And does it really mean, if we're thinking about the climate crisis, if we're thinking about the biodiversity problem, is it really efficient how we have started to do agriculture in the second half of the 20th century in the Netherlands? If you're looking from a very narrow, economically realistic perspective, it might be. But if you take all these other issues into account, I really doubt whether it's so efficient, actually. And so all these words, efficiency, innovation, modern, always think about what, for who, for who. It's not a neutral thing, an innovation, or yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just gonna step in now. by saying a very stupid thing. Oh, it's very complicated. Indeed, it is. That's what historians say. But actually, it's also what engineers say. So for who are these drinks? They are for us. Oh, wow. So please just take a drink and continue the discussion. Don't stop now. Don't go away, but please take something to drink. There is also something to eat. It's all vegan. If you want to hear more about future events in this series, please subscribe to the Studium Generale mailing list at sg.tudelft.nl. We aim to do another session in December and then also 2 sessions in the next half year. So approximately for a year. So, yeah, okay. Let's stand up now and give a round of applause indeed.
Thank you.
Dankjewel.